People like you should stick to mopping floors, not dreaming about cockpits.
Rebecca Thornton's voice cut through the skyline aviation hangar like a blade sharp enough to slice through the morning air and land directly on target. She stood beside her $75 million Gulfstream G650 designer heels, clicking against polished concrete eyes, fixed with laser precision on the black janitor who had dared to glance at her aircraft. Darius Mitchell didn't look up from his mop bucket. 18 months of being invisible. 18 months of swallowing insults that would have broken most men. 18 months of playing a role that burned through his soul like acid, all to gather the evidence his anonymous tip line had been screaming about for 2 years running. What Rebecca Thornton didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine in her perfectly manicured world of privilege and assumptions, was that the janitor she had just humiliated with such casual cruelty owned the entire company. Every rivet, every runway, every executive washroom he cleaned belonged to him. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. I said, "Are you listening?" Rebecca's voice rose, commanding attention from the scattered mechanics and pilots who were trying very hard to pretend they hadn't heard her. "Eyes down, focus on your work. That's what we pay you for." Darius squeezed the mop handle tighter, watching dirty water swirl in the bucket like his patience circling the drain. He'd been Darius Mitchell, billionaire CEO of Mitchell Aviation Holdings, for exactly 12 hours yesterday. From midnight until noon, he'd lived in his penthouse, driven his Bentley, worn his custom suits, and made decisions that affected thousands of employees across 3 continents. But at 5 a.m. this morning, just like every morning for the past year and a half, he'd become invisible again. Gray uniform-worn sneakers, calloused hands, and a fake ID badge that read Danny Williams because Rebecca's hiring manager had told him Danny sounds more appropriate for this type of work. The type of work that apparently came with a side order of humiliation. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his assistant, the real one, not the fictional supervisor who supposedly managed the janitorial staff. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m. The merger documents need your signature. The Japan deal is waiting. $8 billion in business decisions waiting for him. But first, he had toilets to scrub. The morning routine never changed. Arrive at 5 a.m. when the hangar was empty, except for security. Clean the executive offices first, always first, because that's where the real conversations happened. The conversations people had when they thought no one important was listening. Rebecca's office was a shrine to herself. Awards covering one entire wall, photos of her with politicians and celebrities, and a crystal paperweight that cost more than most people's cars. Darius had cleaned around it hundreds of times, listening to her phone calls, her meetings, her casual conversations that revealed exactly who she really was when the cameras weren't rolling. "Sophia, get in here," Rebecca's voice echoed from the hallway. "And bring the Aspen photos. I want to post them before the board meeting." Sophia Valdez hurried past Darius like he was furniture arms full of glossy photos and marketing materials. 28 years old, Harvard MBA, Rebecca's personal assistant and designated enabler. Sophia knew exactly what her boss was, but the salary was too good and the connections too valuable to risk rocking the boat. "Danny's still here," Sophia whispered as she entered Rebecca's office, intentionally loud enough for him to hear. "Should I ask Kyle to adjust the cleaning schedule? Why would I care when the help shows up?" Rebecca's laugh was sharp-cutting. "As long as the floors are clean and the trash is emptied, I don't need to think about that." That. Not him. Not a person with a name and a family and dreams. Just that. Darius had heard worse, much worse. But this morning with his son Jaden's drawing of an airplane taped to his locker in the janitor's closet with the memory of his late wife, Maria's voice whispering, "Make aviation fair," for everyone still echoing in his ears, the casual dehumanization hit differently. Maria Santos appeared around the corner pushing a supply cart loaded with cleaning chemicals and fresh towels. 45 years old maintenance supervisor originally from El Salvador, and the only person in this building who had ever looked him in the eye and smiled like he was human. "Buenos dias, Danny," she said quietly, slipping a water bottle into his supply bucket. "Careful today. Lorena is in a mood. The queen. That's what the Hispanic maintenance staff called Rebecca behind her back. Not out of respect, out of fear." "Gracias, Maria Darius," whispered back, grateful for the small kindness in a place that seemed determined to strip away every shred of dignity he possessed. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo from Mrs. Rodriguez, his son's babysitter. Jaden, 8 years old, standing in their kitchen wearing a pilot's cap that was 3 sizes too big, saluting the camera with the serious expression of someone who believed completely in heroes and happy endings. "Dad," the text read, "Jaden made this for you at school. He says you're going to be a real pilot someday and fly the biggest planes in the sky." Darius stared at the photo of his son's latest art project. A drawing of a man in a pilot's uniform standing next to an airplane. The man was brown like Daddy, and he was smiling, and there were puffy white clouds all around him like he belonged in the sky. If Jaden only knew that Daddy already owned the sky, every piece of it that mattered. But right now, that felt like a secret too dangerous to keep and too painful to reveal. The coffee incident happened at 9:17 a.m. right in front of the main hangar entrance where everyone could see. Darius had been cleaning the windows when Rebecca emerged from her office designer cup in hand, deep in conversation with Sophia about weekend plans in Aspen. He'd stepped aside, made himself smaller, tried to disappear the way he'd learned to do over 18 months of practice, but invisible wasn't good enough today. Rebecca stopped mid-sentence, staring at him like she'd just discovered something unpleasant on the bottom of her shoe. Without warning, without hesitation, she tilted her cup and poured hot coffee down the front of his gray uniform. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "How clumsy of me." The coffee soaked through the fabric, instantly burning his chest, staining everything it touched. Darius stood perfectly still, feeling the heat spread across his skin, watching brown liquid drip onto the floor he'd just finished mopping. "Well," Rebecca raised an eyebrow, gesturing at the mess with her now empty cup. "Clean it up. That's what you're here for." Jake Morrison's laughter echoed across the hangar like a gunshot. Rebecca's boyfriend, 31 years old, heir to a shipping fortune, and a pilot whose primary qualification was having the right last name and the right skin color. He strutted over with the confidence of someone who'd never faced a single consequence for anything in his entire privileged life. At least he's useful for something Jake said loud enough for everyone to hear. Right, baby Rebecca's smile was poison wrapped in Chanel lipstick. "Absolutely. Everyone should know their place." David Kim watched from behind a maintenance cart, 25 years old junior mechanic, recent graduate from aviation school, and one of the few employees brave enough to pull out his phone and start recording. His hands shook slightly as he held the device, but he kept filming. Other employees began to gather. Tom Fletcher, 52 veteran pilot, watching with increasing discomfort. Carmen Ruiz, 33 social media manager, initially filming for her day in the life content, but now capturing something much more significant. A handful of mechanics' office workers and support staff all pretending to work while actually witnessing a public humiliation. "You know what I love about this job," Jake continued, warming to his audience. "Getting to work with such diverse people really adds character to the workplace." The way he said diverse made it sound like a disease. Darius knelt and began cleaning the coffee with paper towels from his supply cart. 1 sheet, 2 sheets, 3 sheets, each one soaking up liquid and dignity in equal measure. He could feel eyes on him, could hear whispered conversations starting to bubble up around the hangar. "This is uncomfortable," someone muttered. "Should we say something?" "Say what?" "She's the CEO." Carmen Ruiz had started her morning live stream as usual, sharing behind-the-scenes content from Skyline Aviation for her 300 followers. But something about this moment felt different, important, and her finger hovered over the broadcast button as she watched the scene unfold. Rebecca noticed the gathering crowd and seemed to feed off their attention like a vampire drawing strength from blood. "Sophia, remind me," she said, her voice carrying perfectly across the suddenly quiet hangar. "What was our discussion about maintaining company image?" Sophia shifted uncomfortably, clearly, recognizing the trap being set for her. "We discussed the importance of professional standards." "That's right. Professional standards." Rebecca's gaze swept across the assembled employees before landing back on Darius, who was still cleaning coffee from the floor. "You see, some people are naturally suited for leadership roles. They have education breeding class. They understand how to present themselves in business environments." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "My father always said you can tell someone's potential by how they carry themselves. It's in the DNA." "Exactly," Rebecca continued. "And others." She gestured vaguely at Darius. "Others are better suited for support roles, manual labor, tasks that don't require complex thinking or decision-making abilities." The words hit the hangar like physical blows. Carmen's live stream viewer count had jumped to 50 people, then 100, then 200 as word spread through social media that something significant was happening. Kyle Patterson appeared from the security office, 35 years old, head of security, and Rebecca's personal enforcer. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He'd been listening to the conversation from across the hangar and decided to add his own commentary. "That's why we have hiring standards," Kyle said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been questioned. "Some positions require certain qualifications: intelligence, education, cultural fit." Cultural fit. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a fire everyone could smell but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Maria Santos had stopped working entirely, standing frozen beside her supply cart with tears forming in her eyes. She'd seen this before, lived this before, but watching it happen to someone else never got easier. Tony Fletcher, the veteran pilot, couldn't stay quiet anymore. "This doesn't seem right," he said, his voice cutting through the ugly atmosphere. "The man's just trying to do his job." Rebecca turned toward Tony with the slow, deliberate movement of a predator who'd found new prey. "Excuse me, Captain Fletcher. Did you have something to contribute to this conversation?" Tony straightened his shoulders. 30 years in the military combat experience in 3 different conflicts, and he'd never backed away from a fight worth fighting. "I said it doesn't seem right. Treating people like that. Like what Rebecca's voice was ice. Like employees. Like people who work for me. Like they're less than human." The hangar fell silent except for the distant hum of machinery and the sound of Carmen's live stream notification pinging as new viewers joined every second. 200 people watching, then 500, then 1,000. Jake stepped closer to Tony, chest puffed out like a rooster looking for a fight. "Maybe you should worry about your own job instead of defending the help." "The help," Tony's voice rose. "His name is Danny. He's a human being, and last I checked, we all work for the same company." Rebecca laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "No, Captain Fletcher. We don't all work for the same company. Some of us run companies. Others clean up after us. It's called hierarchy, and it exists for a reason." Darius finished cleaning the coffee and stood slowly, paper towels in his hand, brown stains covering the front of his uniform like badges of shame he hadn't earned. He looked directly at Rebecca for the first time since the incident began. "Is there anything else you need, ma'am?" His voice was calm, professional, completely controlled. Rebecca studied his face, searching for anger, defiance, any excuse to escalate further. She found nothing but quiet dignity, which somehow made her angrier than if he'd fought back. "Yes, actually," she said. "Stay in your lane, do your job, and remember that some doors are closed for good reasons." Carmen's live stream had reached 2,000 viewers. Comments were pouring in a mixture of outrage and support, people sharing the stream with friends and family, hashtags starting to form organically. David Kim tucked his phone away, but not before sending the video to 3 different group chats and his cousin, who worked at a major news outlet. Some stories were too important to keep quiet. Kyle Patterson stepped forward, hand on his radio, ready to escalate if necessary. "Everything good here, boss." Rebecca nodded, satisfied with her performance. "Everything's perfect. Isn't it?" Danny Darius met her eyes one more time. "Yes, ma'am. Perfect." But as he walked away, pushing his supply cart toward the next area that needed cleaning, his phone buzzed with a text from his real assistant, the one who knew exactly who he was and why he was here. "Emergency board meeting called for this afternoon. The Yamamoto Group wants to finalize the Tokyo acquisition. They specifically requested to meet with you. $8 billion in business. Thousands of jobs. International expansion that would reshape the entire aviation industry. All waiting for the man in the gray uniform who'd just been publicly humiliated for the crime of existing while black in a space where someone had decided he didn't belong." The irony was starting to feel less funny and more like justice waiting to be served. The emergency call came at 11:43 a.m., shattering Rebecca's post-humiliation satisfaction like glass hitting concrete. "What do you mean he's unconscious?" Rebecca's voice echoed through the executive corridor, panic replacing the smugness that had been painted across her face just hours earlier. "When? How bad is it?" Darius paused in his window, cleaning, invisible as always, but perfectly positioned to overhear every word of the conversation that was about to change everything. "I don't care about hurricane warnings." Rebecca continued, her voice cracking with genuine emotion for the first time anyone could remember. "I don't care about flight restrictions. I need to be in Dubai in 6 hours. My father had a massive heart attack during surgery. If I don't get there..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering across the marble floor like her perfectly controlled world falling apart. Sophia rushed to her boss's side, tablet in hand, already working the problem with the efficiency that had earned her the Harvard MBA and the 6-figure salary. "I'm calling every pilot we have. Reynolds is in Seattle. Henderson is stuck in New York due to weather. Martinez is on medical leave." "I don't want excuses," Rebecca snapped, but her voice lacked its usual venom. Fear had replaced arrogance, desperation replacing superiority. "I want solutions. Get me a pilot, any pilot." Carmen Ruiz had been editing her morning live stream when she heard the commotion. Something about the raw panic in Rebecca's voice drew her back toward the executive area, phone ready. Though this time, her motivation wasn't content creation. It was curiosity about how someone who'd been so cruel an hour ago would handle her own crisis. Jake Morrison arrived with his usual swagger, diminished by the obvious gravity of the situation. "Baby, what's wrong? What happened?" "My father." Rebecca managed between attempts to call other aviation companies. "He's dying. In Dubai. I have to get there now." Okay, Jake said, trying to project competence while secretly having no idea how to help. "I can fly you." "No problem. You don't have international certification," Sophia reminded him gently. "And with the hurricane conditions moving through the Atlantic, you'd need someone with serious weather experience." Jake's face flushed red. Being reminded of his limitations in front of an audience wasn't part of his usual script. "I can handle weather. I'm not some amateur." "No," Sophia said firmly, pulling up weather reports on her tablet. "Category 2, hurricane approaching from the southeast. Wind shears, icing conditions, potential for severe turbulence. This isn't a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard." The gathering crowd in the hangar had grown larger. Word was spreading that something big was happening and employees were finding excuses to drift toward the executive area. Carmen's follower count was climbing as she prepared to go live again, sensing that the morning's drama was far from over. Rebecca made call after call, each one ending the same way. Unavailable. Booked solid. Not flying into that weather pattern. Sorry, our insurance doesn't cover hurricane conditions. Her hands were visibly shaking now. The same hands that had poured coffee on Darius 2 hours earlier were trembling as she realized that money and position couldn't solve every problem. There has to be someone, she whispered more to herself than to anyone else. Anyone. That's when Jake had his brilliant idea. The kind of idea that seemed hilarious right up until it backfired spectacularly. "Hey, baby," he said loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "What about your janitor friend? The one who thinks he knows about airplanes?" The suggestion landed in the middle of the hangar like a grenade. Several people looked around confused, while others who had witnessed the morning's humiliation began to understand exactly what Jake was suggesting. "That's not funny," Sophia said quietly. "I'm not trying to be funny," Jake continued, warming to his theme as he noticed more people paying attention. "I'm being practical. If he thinks he understands aviation so well, maybe he should put his mop where his mouth is." Rebecca looked up from her phone, her grief-stricken expression slowly shifting into something else entirely. Something cruel and desperate, and looking for a target to blame for her helplessness. Darius had moved closer, ostensibly to clean the windows near the executive area, but really because he could sense that whatever was about to happen would be significant. His phone buzzed with another message from his assistant. 3 potential solutions for the Tokyo deal, all requiring your immediate attention. But he couldn't look away from the train wreck that was building momentum in front of him. "You know what Rebecca said?" Her voice carrying across the hangar as she stood and walked toward the main floor. "Jake's right. Where is our aviation expert? Our resident pilot?" She was looking directly at Darius now, and everyone in the hangar followed her gaze. Carmen hit the live button on her stream viewer count, immediately jumping to 500 people as word spread that something dramatic was happening. "Ma'am," Darius said quietly, setting down his cleaning supplies. "You," Rebecca said, pointing at him like an accusation. "Earlier today you seemed very interested in aircraft, very knowledgeable about things that are none of your business." The crowd was growing by the minute, mechanics stopping their work, office staff emerging from their cubicles. Even some of the pilots who weren't currently flying had gathered to see what was happening. "I was just working, ma'am," Darius replied, but Rebecca wasn't listening to reason anymore. She was running on grief and desperation and the need to transfer her pain onto someone else. "Working," she repeated mockingly. "Right. Well, I have a job opportunity for you. A real job. Something that requires all that aviation knowledge you seem to think you have." Jake stepped up beside her, grinning like he was about to witness the greatest practical joke in history. "Tell him about the jet, baby. Tell him about Dubai." Rebecca's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "I need someone to fly my jet to Dubai. Emergency trip. Dangerous weather conditions. Requires an experienced pilot with international certification and weather expertise." She paused, letting the impossibility of what she was suggesting sink in for everyone watching. "Think you're up for it?" The hangar fell silent except for the sound of Carmen's live stream notifications pinging as viewer count climbed toward 1,000 people. Comments were pouring in a mix of outrage and fascination as people realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Darius looked around at the faces surrounding him, some hostile, some curious, some clearly uncomfortable with what they were seeing. Maria Santos was standing near the supply closet, hands pressed to her mouth in horror. David Kim had his phone out again, recording everything. "I don't understand, ma'am," Darius said carefully. "It's simple." Jake jumped in, loving every second of the spotlight. "Rebecca needs a pilot. You seem to think you know about flying. So fly her jet to Dubai and back, if you can handle it." "And if I can't?" Darius asked. Rebecca stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume, mixed with the scent of desperation. If you can't when you fail, you'll face criminal charges for aircraft theft, endangering lives, and fraud. Her voice carried across the hangar like a death sentence. But when you succeed... She laughed, the sound bitter and cruel. Well, that's not going to happen, is it? People like you don't just become pilots overnight. Carmen's live stream had reached 1,500 viewers. Someone in the comments had recognized Rebecca and Jake, and word was spreading across social media that something major was happening at Skyline Aviation. Actually, Darius said quietly, "I'd like to take you up on your offer." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the gathered crowd. Rebecca's confident smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "You're serious," she said. "You actually think you can fly a $75 million aircraft?" "Yes, ma'am." Jake burst into laughter. "This is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. Baby, we need to make this official. Contracts witnesses the whole thing." "You're right," Rebecca agreed, her lawyer instincts kicking in alongside her cruelty. "Sophia, draft something up. Emergency flight to Dubai. No co-pilot, no assistance. Land safely, return by midnight." Sophia looked horrified. "Rebecca, this is insane. You can't seriously be considering—" "I'm not considering anything," Rebecca cut her off. "I'm offering this man exactly what he wants, a chance to prove that he's more than just the help." David Kim's video had been uploaded to Reddit and was already gaining traction. The title read, "CEO Makes Impossible Bet with Janitor. This is going to end badly." Comments were pouring in, the post climbing toward the front page. Tony Fletcher pushed through the crowd. "This has gone too far. Rebecca, you're talking about putting someone's life in danger for no good reason." "No good reason." Rebecca turned on him with fury. "My father is dying. I need to get to Dubai. This man claims he can help." "Where's the problem?" "The problem is that he's not a pilot," Jake said. "He's a janitor with delusions of grandeur. And when he crashes that jet, maybe people will finally understand why we have standards." Maria Santos couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Esto está mal," she whispered loud enough for people nearby to hear. "This is wrong." "What's wrong?" Kyle Patterson said, appearing from nowhere like he always did when Rebecca needed backup, is letting people get ideas above their station. "Maybe this will be a good lesson for everyone." Carmen's viewer count had exploded past 3,000 as people shared the stream across platforms. Local news outlets were starting to monitor the situation. Aviation blogs were picking up the story. "So what do you say?" Janitor Rebecca asked, her voice carrying across the hangar like a challenge and a threat rolled into one. "Ready to put your money where your mop is." Darius looked around one more time at the faces surrounding him, at Maria's tears of concern, at David's phone recording everything, at Carmen broadcasting his humiliation live to thousands of strangers, at Tony Fletcher's worried expression and Sophia's horrified disbelief. And then he looked at Rebecca and Jake standing there with their privileged smiles and their casual cruelty and their absolute certainty that they were untouchable. "I accept," he said simply. The hangar erupted. Cheers from some quarters, gasps of disbelief from others, and a steady stream of camera clicks as everyone tried to capture the moment when a janitor agreed to attempt the impossible. Rebecca pulled out her phone and called her lawyer. "I need a contract. Right now. Liability waiver, criminal consequences clause, the full package." As the legal paperwork was being prepared, as the crowd grew larger and the social media buzz reached fever pitch as Rebecca and Jake high-fived each other in anticipation of the spectacular failure they were about to witness, Darius quietly pulled out his phone and sent a single text message to his assistant, his real assistant, the one who knew exactly who he was and why he was there. "Prepare the documentation. All of it. Today's the day." The walk from the hangar floor to the Gulfstream G650 was only 50 yards, but it felt like crossing from one world into another entirely. Darius moved with purpose, now his gait changing subtly from the shuffling invisibility of a janitor to something else entirely. Something that made Tony Fletcher stop mid-conversation and stare. Something that made Maria Santos whisper a prayer in Spanish. Something that made David Kim zoom in his camera phone because he sensed he was about to witness something extraordinary. "Look at him go!" Jake laughed, following the procession toward the aircraft. "All that confidence, it's going to make the crash so much more satisfying." Rebecca walked beside the jet's owner without knowing it. Her lawyer on speakerphone drafting a contract that would either humiliate Darius completely or protect her from the lawsuit she was convinced would come when this publicity stunt inevitably ended in disaster. Carmen's livestream had reached 5,000 viewers as word spread across social media. Aviation enthusiasts from around the world were tuning in to watch what many were calling either the greatest workplace prank in history or a catastrophe waiting to happen. The crowd following them had swelled to nearly 100 people. Mechanics' office workers, pilots, and support staff who had abandoned their duties to witness whatever was about to unfold. Security had given up trying to disperse them. Even they wanted to see what happened next. As they approached the aircraft, Darius stopped and looked up at the machine he owned but had never been allowed to acknowledge. $75 million of cutting-edge aviation technology, twin Rolls-Royce engines, range of 7,500 nautical miles. Seating for up to 14 passengers, and a cockpit that required thousands of hours of training and certification to operate legally. "Having second thoughts?" Rebecca asked with a smirk. "It's not too late to back out. Go back to mopping floors where you belong." Instead of answering, Darius began walking around the aircraft in a slow, methodical circle. His movements were precise, professional, like someone conducting a pre-flight inspection, which, as it happened, was exactly what he was doing. He knelt beside the landing gear, examining the tires and hydraulic systems with the kind of attention to detail that only came from experience. Real experience. The kind that couldn't be faked or learned from watching YouTube videos. "What's he doing?" Sophia whispered. Tony Fletcher was watching intently, his 30 years of aviation experience recognizing something that the others were missing. "Pre-flight inspection," he said quietly. "And he's doing it right," Jake scoffed. "Anyone can walk around a plane and pretend to know what they're looking at. Watch him try to actually start the engines. That's when this joke stops being funny." But Darius continued his inspection with methodical precision. Checking the wing surfaces for ice or damage, examining the pitot tubes and static ports, running his hands along the engine inlets, each movement deliberate, professional, correct. Carmen was providing live commentary for her growing audience, now past 7,000 viewers. "Okay, so this is either the most elaborate prank in history or something really incredible is about to happen. The way he's moving, it's like he actually knows what he's doing." Comments were flooding in from actual pilots watching the stream. "That's a proper pre-flight. Who taught him that?" "If this is fake, he's doing his homework. Those inspection points are exactly right." "Where did a janitor learn maintenance procedures?" Rebecca was getting impatient. The contract had been prepared and sent to her phone. Legal liability waiver, criminal consequences if the aircraft was damaged or if he failed to return safely. Everything necessary to protect her legally while she watched her employee destroy himself publicly. "Are we doing this or not?" she demanded. "My father could be dying while you're playing dress-up." Darius completed his inspection and stood beside the aircraft's main entrance. For 18 months he'd watched other pilots board aircraft like this. He'd cleaned up after them, listened to their conversations, pretended not to understand their technical discussions. He'd been invisible while they owned the sky that rightfully belonged to him. "Contract," he said simply. Rebecca handed him her phone, the legal document displayed on the screen. He read it quickly, professionally, like someone who'd reviewed thousands of similar documents during his real career, which he had. This specifies no assistance, no co-pilot, and criminal consequences if the aircraft is damaged or if I fail to return safely by midnight, he summarized. Is that accurate? That's right, Jake said. Think you can handle it, Janitor? Darius looked at him with an expression that seemed almost amused. I think I can manage. He signed the contract electronically, handed the phone back to Rebecca, and then did something that made the crowd go completely silent. He pulled out his own phone and made a call. This is Darius, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hangar. I need aircraft N947DM prepared for immediate departure to Dubai. International flight plan, weather routing, and customs clearance. There was a pause as everyone tried to process what they'd just heard. 7DM. The tail number of Rebecca's aircraft. The aircraft they were all standing beside. How does he know the tail number? Sophia whispered. Rebecca snatched the phone from his hand before he could continue the call. Who were you calling? Who has access to my aircraft information? Darius retrieved his phone calmly. Operations Center, standard procedure for international departure. It was a lie, of course. He'd been calling his assistant to begin the process that would end with Rebecca Thornton's career in ruins. But they didn't need to know that yet. Standard procedure. Jake laughed. For who? You're a janitor, not a pilot. You're right, Darius said, approaching the aircraft's boarding stairs. I'm not a pilot. Rebecca's smile was triumphant. Finally, a little honesty. Darius paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at the crowd of people who'd gathered to witness his humiliation. At Carmen, still broadcasting live to 10,000 viewers. At David Kim, recording everything on his phone. At Maria Santos, tears streaming down her face because she was watching a good man walk into what everyone believed was certain disaster. I'm not a pilot, he repeated. I'm a captain. There's a difference. And then he climbed the stairs and disappeared into the aircraft that belonged to him, leaving behind a crowd of people who had no idea that their world was about to change forever. Inside the cockpit, Darius settled into the pilot's seat with the comfortable familiarity of someone coming home. The Gulfstream G650 was his favorite aircraft in his fleet. He'd personally overseen its design modifications and had flown it himself dozens of times during test flights and certification procedures. He began the startup sequence with practiced efficiency. Battery switches on. Avionics master on. Engine parameters checked. Flight management system initialized. Each switch, each button, each procedure executed with the precision of someone who could have done it blindfolded. Outside, the crowd pressed against the hangar windows to watch what they assumed would be either a spectacular failure or a brief moment of embarrassment before he gave up and climbed back down. Instead, they heard the unmistakable sound of twin Rolls-Royce engines spooling to life. Holy shit, someone whispered. He actually started the engines. This is really happening. Carmen's live stream had exploded past 15,000 viewers as word spread that something unprecedented was unfolding. Aviation forums were buzzing, Reddit threads were multiplying, local news outlets were dispatching crews. And in the cockpit of N947DM Captain Darius Mitchell, former Air Force test pilot, current CEO of Mitchell Aviation Holdings and owner of the company where he'd spent 18 months being treated like less than human, contacted the control tower and requested clearance for departure. Tower, this is Skyline 1, requesting clearance to taxi for departure to Dubai. Skyline 1, stand by. Are you declaring an emergency? Darius smiled for the first time in 18 months. Negative, Tower. Just heading home. The Gulfstream G650 rolled onto the active runway with the smooth precision of a machine operated by someone who understood exactly what he was doing. In the tower, air traffic controllers were scrambling to verify credentials, check flight plans, and figure out how a janitor had managed to start a $75 million aircraft and request international clearance. Tower, Skyline. 1. Ready for departure. Darius announced, his voice carrying the calm professionalism that marked genuine expertise. Rebecca stood at the hangar windows, phone pressed to her ear, screaming at whoever would listen. "I don't care what your database says. Check again. There's no way that man is certified to fly anything more complicated than a shopping cart." Carmen's live stream had reached 25,000 viewers as news outlets began picking up the story. Aviation professionals from around the world were tuning in to watch what many were calling either the greatest hoax in aviation history or something that would change how everyone thought about assumptions and prejudice. Skyline 1. You are cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Wind 240 at 15. Fly heading 090 after departure. Cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Heading 090 after departure. Skyline 1. The engines spooled to full power with a sound that resonated through the hangar like thunder. Jake Morrison, who had been making increasingly nervous jokes as the reality of the situation sank in, fell silent as he watched the aircraft accelerate down the runway with textbook precision. "He's actually doing it," Sophia whispered. "He's actually flying the plane." The takeoff was flawless. Perfect rotation speed, optimal climb rate, smooth transition from ground to air. In the tower, controllers, who had been skeptical minutes earlier, were now calling colleagues to watch the radar display as Skyline 1 climbed toward cruising altitude with the kind of precision that only came from serious training and experience. Tony Fletcher stood transfixed by what he was witnessing. 3 decades in aviation had taught him to recognize skill when he saw it, and what he was watching through binoculars was not beginner's luck or random chance. It was the work of someone who belonged in that cockpit. Where the hell did he learn to fly like that? He muttered. Maria Santos was crying again, but this time her tears were tears of joy mixed with amazement. She'd watched Darius being humiliated for months, had seen him accept cruelty with quiet dignity, and now she was watching him literally rise above everything that had been done to him. David Kim's phone had died from recording too much video, but not before he'd uploaded everything to multiple platforms. The hashtag was exploding across social media as people realized they were witnessing something historic. Not just a man proving his critics wrong, but a complete reversal of everything everyone had believed about who belonged where and who was capable of what. Inside the aircraft, Darius was in his element for the first time in 18 months. The Gulfstream responded to his inputs like an extension of his will, climbing smoothly through 25,000 feet toward cruising altitude. He contacted departure control with the professional ease of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. Departure Skyline 1 with you climbing to flight level 450, Skyline 1 radar contact. Turn left heading 062 climb and maintain flight level 450. Contact Boston Center on 124.72. Left 060 climb and maintain 450. Contact Boston 124.72. Skyline 1. The handoff between controllers was seamless professional routine, which was exactly what was blowing everyone's minds. There was nothing about this flight that suggested amateur operation or beginner's luck. Every communication, every procedure, every maneuver was being executed with the kind of competence that required years of training and certification. Back in the hangar, Rebecca was on her 4th phone call trying to verify Darius's credentials. FAA records aviation databases, employment verification services. Everything was coming back negative because she was looking for Danny Williams, the name on his fake janitor ID. She had no idea she should have been looking for Captain Darius Mitchell. "This is impossible," she kept repeating. "People don't just know how to fly jets. There has to be some explanation." Jake had gone from confident mockery to nervous pacing as the reality of what was happening sank in. If the janitor actually managed to fly to Dubai and back, the joke would be on them. More than that, it would be international news. Their humiliation would be broadcast to the world. "Maybe we should call this off," he said quietly. "Tell him to come back. Say it was all a mistake. Call it off how Rebecca snapped. He's already in international airspace, and he signed a contract." Sophia was monitoring social media, watching the story explode across every platform. "Rebecca, this is bigger than just us. This is going viral. CNN is picking up the story. Aviation Week is calling for comment. We need to figure out what our response is going to be." Carmen's live stream had been shared by celebrities, politicians, and news outlets. Her follower count had exploded from 300 to 50,000 in a matter of hours. Comments were pouring in from around the world, people sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination and cheering for the underdog who was literally flying above his oppressors. "I can't believe what we're witnessing," Carmen told her audience. "This man, this janitor who everyone thought was just the help, is flying a $75 million jet to Dubai like he was born to do it. And the CEO who humiliated him this morning is standing here looking like she just saw a ghost." International Air Traffic Control began tracking Skyline 1 as it crossed into oceanic airspace. Controllers in Gander, Reykjavik, and London were all noting the same thing. Whoever was flying that aircraft knew exactly what they were doing. "Skyline 1, contact Shanwick Radio on 5.49. Contact Shanwick 5.649, Skyline 1. Good day, sir, safe flight." The "sir" in that transmission carried weight. Controllers didn't use honorifics casually. It was recognition of professional competence, pilot-to-pilot respect that couldn't be faked or earned through luck. Hours passed. Rebecca's father stabilized in Dubai, giving her a window of time she hadn't expected. But instead of relief, she felt growing dread as aviation professionals began calling to ask about her new pilot and how she'd managed to find someone with such obvious skill working as a janitor. Carmen's stream had reached 100,000 viewers. News outlets were calling for interviews. Aviation forums were exploding with theories about who this mysterious pilot really was and how he'd ended up cleaning toilets at Skyline Aviation. And then, 8 hours after departure, Skyline 1 contacted Dubai Approach Control. "Dubai Approach Skyline. 1 with you descending out of flight level 450 for approach. Skyline 1. Dubai approach. Winds 350 at 22 gusts to 35. Be advised, sandstorm moving through the area. Visibility dropping rapidly. Are you equipped for Category 3 approach?" There was a pause. In hangars and air traffic control centers around the world, people held their breath. Category 3 approaches required special equipment, specialized training, and certification that most pilots never attempted. It was the kind of procedure that separated professional aviators from weekend hobbyists. Dubai approach. Skyline 1 is equipped and certified for Category 3. Requesting ILS approach. Runway 30 left. Skyline 1 cleared for ILS approach, runway 30 left. Winds now 350 at 28 gusts to 40. Caution wake turbulence from departing heavy aircraft. What followed was a textbook approach and landing in conditions that would have challenged even the most experienced airline pilots. Smooth, precise, professional. The kind of flying that made controllers pause in admiration and other pilots stop their own activities to watch. Skyline 1. Welcome to Dubai. Contact ground 121.9 for taxi instructions. Beautiful approach. Ground 121.9. Thank you for the compliment. Skyline 1. Beautiful approach. From Dubai controllers who saw thousands of landings every month, who worked with pilots from every airline in the world who didn't offer praise lightly. Back at Skyline Aviation, the hangar was packed with employees, reporters, and curious onlookers who had heard about the story and come to witness the conclusion. Rebecca stood surrounded by cameras and microphones, trying to explain how her janitor had managed to successfully complete one of the most challenging flights in commercial aviation. "I don't have an explanation," she finally admitted. This isn't what we expected. Jake had disappeared entirely unable to face the growing crowd and the questions about his role in what was increasingly being called the aviation story of the decade. And in Dubai, at the fixed base operator, where Skyline 1 had parked ground crews, were talking about the pilot who had just landed in impossible conditions and made it look routine. They asked the customs officials who the pilot was expecting to hear about some legendary aviator with decades of experience. Instead, they were told the pilot's name was Danny Williams, and according to his employment records, he was a janitor from Chicago, which made absolutely no sense at all. But that was about to change, because as Skyline 1 prepared for its return flight, Darius made one more phone call, this time to his lawyer, not his assistant. It's time, he said simply. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. I've been invisible for 18 months. I think I'm ready to be seen. The return flight would change everything. But first, the world needed to know exactly who they'd been watching. The return flight from Dubai began with what appeared to be a routine departure at 11:47 p.m. local time. Skyline 1 climbed smoothly into the night sky, navigation lights blinking against the stars, while thousands of people around the world tracked its progress through flight monitoring websites that had crashed multiple times from unprecedented traffic. What no one knew, including Rebecca Thornton, was that during the brief stopover in Dubai, Darius had made a series of phone calls that were about to reshape everything everyone thought they knew about power identity and who really belonged in the sky. Carmen's live stream had been running for 14 hours straight, with viewer counts fluctuating between 50,000 and 200,000 as people around the globe tuned in to follow the conclusion of what was being called the aviation story of the century. News outlets from CNN to BBC were providing live coverage. Aviation forums had crashed from traffic. I've been broadcasting live for 14 hours. Carmen told her audience, exhaustion clear in her voice, but excitement keeping her going. And I still can't believe what we've witnessed. A janitor, a man everyone ignored and dismissed, just completed a round trip to Dubai in hurricane conditions like he was born to do it. Back at Skyline Aviation, the hangar had transformed into an impromptu media center. Reporters, aviation enthusiasts, employees, and curious onlookers packed every available space, all waiting for the return of Skyline 1 and the answers to questions that had been growing more urgent with every passing hour. Rebecca stood in the center of the chaos, surrounded by microphones and cameras, trying to maintain some semblance of control over a narrative that had spiraled completely beyond her influence. For 18 months, she'd been in charge. She'd set the rules, determined who belonged where, decided who was worth listening to and who could be ignored. Now she was answering questions from reporters who wanted to know how she'd ended up with a world-class pilot working as a janitor in her facility. Ms. Thornton, a reporter from Aviation Week, called out, "Our sources indicate that the pilot of Skyline 1 executed a Category 3 approach in Dubai during a sandstorm. That requires specialized certification that takes years to obtain. Can you explain how someone you employed as janitorial staff acquired those qualifications?" Rebecca's carefully maintained composure was cracking under the pressure. "I'm investigating. There are obviously discrepancies in his employment records that need to be resolved." "Discrepancies?" another reporter pressed. "Ms. Thornton, we've spoken with air traffic controllers from Boston to Dubai. They're all describing the same thing, professional-level competence that doesn't happen overnight. Are you suggesting this was some kind of elaborate fraud?" Before Rebecca could answer, Sophia appeared at her elbow with a tablet displaying something that made her face go pale. "Rebecca," she whispered urgently, "you need to see this." The tablet showed a series of search results for Darius Mitchell that Sophia had finally thought to look up after 18 hours of trying to verify the credentials of Danny Williams. What she'd found was terrifying in its implications. Captain Darius Mitchell, former Air Force test pilot. Darius Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Aviation Holdings. Darius Mitchell worth $8 billion according to Forbes. Rebecca stared at the screen in disbelief. The photos showed a man in expensive suits standing beside aircraft, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. But the face was unmistakable. It was their janitor. "This is impossible," she breathed. "This has to be some kind of mistake. Some kind of identity theft or—" Her voice trailed off as the implications began to sink in. If the man she'd been humiliating for 18 months was actually a billionaire CEO, if he was actually the owner of aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars, if he was actually qualified to fly anything that had ever been built, then what did that make her Jake Morrison had been hiding in the security office, monitoring social media and watching his own reputation disintegrate in real time? Videos of his racist comments from that morning were being shared millions of times. Aviation companies were distancing themselves from him. His family's shipping business was being flooded with calls demanding his resignation from positions he'd never earned through merit. But when Sophia's discovery reached him through the gossip network that connected every corner of the facility, his reaction wasn't shame or remorse. It was denial escalating into anger. "I don't believe it," he said, bursting into the hangar and pushing through the crowd toward Rebecca. "This is some kind of elaborate con job. You don't go from cleaning toilets to flying jets. It doesn't work that way." Tony Fletcher, who had been watching the evening's events with growing amazement and dread, stepped forward to confront Jake directly. "Maybe it does work that way. Maybe you just never bothered to look past your own prejudices to see what was right in front of you." "Prejudices!" Jake's voice rose to a shout. "I call bullshit on this whole thing. Nobody with that kind of money works as a janitor. Nobody with that kind of training pretends to be invisible for 18 months. There's an explanation, and when we find it, all of you are going to look like idiots for falling for the biggest scam in aviation history." David Kim, who had been documenting everything on his phone since the morning's coffee incident, stepped forward with a device that made everyone in the hangar fall silent. A tablet displaying flight tracking information, social media feeds, and most importantly, a live stream that was showing something unprecedented. Skyline 1's return flight was being tracked by every major aviation monitoring service in the world. Its route, altitude, speed, and navigation were being analyzed in real time by professional pilots who were posting their assessments online. Perfect adherence to international airways, one airline captain had posted. Navigation precision within meters of filed flight plan. This isn't luck or beginner's skill. This is someone who's done this thousands of times. Another pilot had analyzed the radio transmissions that were being recorded and broadcast by aviation enthusiasts. Professional terminology, proper phraseology, immediate responses to ATC instructions. Whoever this is, he's been trained to military standards, but the most damning evidence was coming from Skyline Aviation's own systems. David had accessed the facility's security footage and discovered something that made everyone's blood run cold. "You want to know who Darius Mitchell really is?" he said, connecting his tablet to the hangar's display system. "Let me show you." The screens around the hangar lit up with security footage from the past 18 months. Hundreds of hours of video showing their janitor moving through the facility. But David had edited the footage to show specific moments, specific behaviors that everyone had missed because they'd been looking at a uniform instead of the man wearing it. Darius examining aircraft with the eye of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. Darius listening to technical conversations with the focus of someone who understood every word. Darius moving through the facility with the confidence of someone who belonged there, not because he was allowed to be there, but because he owned it. "He wasn't hiding," David announced to the packed hangar. "We just refused to see him." The footage continued showing interaction after interaction where Darius had demonstrated knowledge, competence, and professionalism that everyone had ignored because it didn't fit their expectations of what a janitor should know or be able to do. Rebecca watched the montage with growing horror as she realized the full scope of what had been happening under her nose. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every racist assumption had been witnessed and documented by someone who had the power to destroy her career with a single phone call. "My God," she whispered, What have we done? That's when the hangar's phone system began ringing. Not one phone, but every phone in the building simultaneously. The main number, the executive line, the operations center, the maintenance office. Every extension lit up at once with incoming calls from news outlets, aviation companies, government officials, and business leaders who had heard the story and wanted answers. Sophia answered the main line and found herself talking to a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who wanted to know how Skyline Aviation had ended up employing one of the richest men in aviation as a janitor. Before she could formulate a response, Kyle Patterson burst into the hangar with news that made the situation exponentially worse. "Federal investigators are here," he announced breathlessly. "FAA, FBI Department of Labor. They want to interview everyone involved in today's incident." Rebecca's legs gave out. She sank into a nearby chair as the full implications of 18 months of documented workplace discrimination began to hit her. If Darius Mitchell was who they now believed him to be, if he had been recording and documenting everything that had happened to him, if he had evidence of the pattern of racist behavior that had permeated every corner of the facility, she wasn't just looking at losing her job. She was looking at federal civil rights violations that could send her to prison. Carmen's live stream audience had swelled past 300,000 viewers as word spread that something massive was about to be revealed. Comments were pouring in from around the world with people sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination while expressing amazement at what they were witnessing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carmen announced to her global audience, "I think we're about to find out exactly who we've been watching for the past 18 hours. And based on what I'm seeing here in the hangar, based on the federal agents who just arrived, based on the way everyone who participated in this morning's humiliation is starting to panic, I think this story is about to get much, much bigger." That's when the hangar's main entrance opened and a black sedan pulled up to the aircraft parking area. A man in an expensive suit emerged, followed by several others carrying briefcases and legal documents. "Who's that?" someone in the crowd asked. David Kim was filming everything, catching the moment when the man in the suit walked directly toward Rebecca with the confident stride of someone who owned everything he was walking on. "Ms. Thornton," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent hangar. "My name is James Anderson, legal counsel for Mitchell Aviation Holdings. My client would like to speak with you when he arrives." Rebecca tried to speak, but no words came out. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be the climax of a story that had already exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Anderson continued pulling documents from his briefcase. "I have here 18 months of documented evidence of workplace discrimination, hostile work environment, and civil rights violations occurring at this facility. My client has been operating undercover to investigate anonymous complaints that were filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission." The words hit the hangar like physical blows. 18 months of evidence, federal complaints, undercover investigation. Every conversation, every interaction, every incident of discriminatory behavior has been recorded and documented according to federal guidelines. "Ms. Thornton, you and several of your employees are facing serious legal consequences." Jake Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face red with anger and desperation. "This is bullshit. You can't prove anything. So what if he can fly a plane? That doesn't make him some kind of civil rights hero." Anderson looked at Jake with the kind of expression lawyers reserved for people who were about to discover exactly how wrong they could be. "Mr. Morrison, my client isn't some kind of civil rights hero. He's the owner of this company. He's your employer. And you've just spent 18 months providing him with enough evidence of discriminatory behavior to shut down this facility permanently." The hangar erupted in shocked voices and camera flashes as reporters realized they weren't just covering a story about an unlikely pilot. They were witnessing the exposure of an undercover investigation that had captured months of documented workplace discrimination at the highest levels of a major aviation company. And then, cutting through all the noise and chaos, came the sound everyone had been waiting for. Twin Rolls-Royce engines approaching from the east as Skyline 1 returned from Dubai exactly on schedule. Carmen pointed her camera toward the sound, her voice filled with anticipation as she addressed her global audience. Here he comes, the janitor who turned out to be a billionaire CEO, the man who spent 18 months being invisible so he could document everything that happened to him. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're about to meet the real Darius Mitchell. The aircraft touched down with perfect precision, taxied to its parking position, and shut down engines. The boarding stairs deployed automatically, and a figure appeared in the doorway. But this time, he wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. This time, Captain Darius Mitchell emerged wearing the kind of custom suit that cost more than most people's cars, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had just proven a point that would reshape how everyone in that hangar thought about power privilege and the dangerous assumptions people make about who belongs where. The transformation was complete. The reveal was perfect. And the consequences were just beginning. Darius Mitchell walked down the aircraft stairs wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, custom leather shoes that made no sound against the metal steps, and an expression of quiet satisfaction that came from 18 months of patience finally bearing fruit. The hangar fell silent except for the sound of camera shutters and the quiet hum of Carmen's live stream, which had reached 400,000 viewers as word spread that the conclusion of the most watched workplace drama in internet history was about to unfold. Rebecca Thornton stood frozen beside the aircraft. She now realized she had never actually owned watching the man she'd spent months humiliating approach her with the calm confidence of someone who held every card in a game she was just now realizing she'd been losing since the day it started. Ms. Thornton Darius said quietly, his voice carrying clearly across the packed hangar. I believe we have some business to discuss. Jake Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face red with anger and disbelief, still refusing to accept what was obvious to everyone else. This is impossible. You're a janitor. You clean toilets. You don't just become a billionaire overnight. Darius turned to face Jake with an expression that was almost amused. You're absolutely right, Mr. Morrison. I didn't become a billionaire overnight. I've been one for quite some time. I just chose to work undercover at my own company to investigate the discrimination complaints that have been filing up on my desk for the past 2 years. He pulled out his phone and held it up so everyone could see the screen. This device has been recording every conversation, every interaction, every racist comment, and every instance of workplace harassment that has occurred in this facility over the past 18 months. All of it documented according to federal guidelines and admissible in court. The weight of those words settled over the hangar like a heavy blanket. Rebecca's face had gone completely white. Kyle Patterson was backing toward the exit, realizing that his role as chief enabler was about to cost him everything. Sophia stood perfectly still, mentally calculating how much she might have witnessed versus how much she had actually participated in. James Anderson stepped forward with a briefcase full of legal documents that represented 18 months of evidence gathering. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, he announced my client has authorized me to release the following information. The crowd pressed closer as Anderson began reading from prepared statements that would reshape how everyone thought about workplace discrimination and the dangerous assumptions people made about who belonged where. Mr. Darius Mitchell is the founder and CEO of Mitchell Aviation Holdings, a company worth approximately $8 billion that owns 12 major aviation companies across 3 continents. 6 months ago, he began an undercover investigation of Skyline Aviation following multiple anonymous complaints filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Rebecca tried to speak, but no words came out. Everything she'd built, everything she'd worked for, everything she'd thought she controlled was dissolving in front of her eyes. The investigation has documented extensive evidence of workplace discrimination, hostile work environment, and federal civil rights violations. The evidence includes recorded conversations, video documentation, and witness testimony from multiple sources. David Kim stepped forward, holding up his phone with hours of recorded video. I've got everything, he said simply. Every cruel comment, every racist assumption, every moment of deliberate humiliation. All of it. Carmen's live stream audience had exploded past 500,000 viewers as news outlets around the world picked up the story. Congressional representatives were already calling for investigations into workplace discrimination across the aviation industry. Darius walked directly to Rebecca, stopping close enough that only she could hear his words. "You asked me this morning if I knew my place," he said quietly. "Well, Miss Thornton, my place is owner of this company. Your place is unemployed." Then he raised his voice so everyone in the hangar could hear. "Rebecca Thornton, you are terminated immediately for workplace discrimination, hostile work environment, and violation of federal civil rights laws. Security will escort you from the premises." Rebecca's legs gave out completely. She sank to the floor as the reality of losing everything hit her like a physical blow. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "This can't be real." "Kyle Patterson," Darius continued, "you are terminated for enabling discriminatory behavior and creating a hostile work environment through your actions as head of security." Kyle was already halfway to the exit, but federal agents were waiting by the doors. His evening was going to get much worse before it got better. Jake Morrison, Darius, turned to face Rebecca's boyfriend, who was standing in the middle of the hangar looking like someone had just explained to him that gravity worked backwards. "You are permanently banned from all Mitchell Aviation Holdings properties. Your pilot's license will be reviewed by the FAA based on evidence of discriminatory behavior and professional unfitness." Jake's face went through several different colors before settling on a shade of gray that matched his prospects for future employment in aviation. "You can't do this," he said desperately. "I have contracts. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," one of the federal agents said, approaching with handcuffs. "You also have the right to an attorney." The arrests were swift, professional, and broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers who watched 18 months of documented racism finally face consequences. Rebecca and Kyle were led away in federal custody, while Jake was served with legal papers that would end his aviation career permanently. But Darius wasn't finished. Sophia Valdez, he called out, causing her to freeze in terror. "You kept your mouth shut when you should have spoken up. But you also showed signs of conscience during several incidents. You'll be keeping your job, but you'll be attending mandatory training on federal discrimination laws and workplace ethics." Sophia nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face as she realized she was one of the few people who would survive the night with her career intact. Maria Santos Darius continued, and Maria stepped forward with obvious fear. "You showed kindness to someone everyone else treated as invisible. You're being promoted to Director of Workplace Culture with responsibility for ensuring that what happened here never happens again at any Mitchell Aviation Holdings facility." Maria burst into tears of relief and gratitude, unable to speak, as she realized that her small acts of human decency had not only been noticed, but were being rewarded. David Kim Darius turned to the young mechanic who had documented everything on his phone. "Your evidence gathering and moral courage helped make this investigation successful. You're being promoted to lead mechanic with full scholarship support to complete your aviation engineering degree." The crowd was cheering now, realizing they were witnessing justice being served in real time. Carmen's live stream had crashed and restarted twice from the volume of viewers trying to watch history unfold. Tony Fletcher. Darius called out to the veteran pilot who had been the only one to speak up during the morning's humiliation. "Your willingness to stand up for what's right when everyone else stayed silent shows the kind of leadership this industry needs. You're being promoted to Chief Pilot Operations, with responsibility for pilot training and professional development across all our facilities." Tony wiped tears from his eyes, overwhelmed by the recognition that his military training to always do the right thing had finally paid dividends in civilian life. But the most important moment came when Darius pulled out his phone and made one more call, this one to his son. "Jaden," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hangar. "Daddy caught all the bad people at work. I'm coming home now, and I never have to pretend to be someone else again. The 8-year-old's excited voice carried through the phone speaker. Did you fly the big plane, Daddy? Did you show them you're a real pilot? I showed them exactly who I am, buddy. And now everyone knows that dreams don't have color limits. The hangar erupted in applause, but Darius wasn't done with his revelations. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the crowd and to Carmen's global audience, this investigation wasn't just about one company or one incident. This was about exposing a pattern of discrimination that exists throughout the aviation industry. The evidence we've gathered will be shared with federal authorities to ensure that what happened here is eliminated everywhere. The implications were staggering. 18 months of undercover investigation at one of the industry's major players would trigger reviews, investigations, and policy changes across the entire aviation sector. As federal agents finished their arrests and reporters scrambled to file stories that would dominate headlines for weeks, Darius walked to his aircraft for the last time as an undercover janitor, and the first time as the openly acknowledged owner of everything around him. The transformation was complete. Justice had been served, and an 8-year-old boy was about to learn that his hero father was an even bigger hero than he'd ever imagined. 6 months after what the media had dubbed the skyline revelation, the aviation industry was still adapting to changes that had rippled outward like shockwaves from a single point of impact. Mitchell Aviation Holdings had implemented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols in the industry, creating a model that other companies were scrambling to duplicate before federal investigators turned their attention elsewhere. Anonymous reporting networks, mandatory bias training, and zero-tolerance enforcement had become standard practice across 12 companies and 3 continents. The ripple effects extended far beyond corporate policy changes. Rebecca Thornton had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for civil rights violations, serving as a warning to executives everywhere that documented discrimination would face serious consequences. Her case had been covered extensively in business schools as an example of how personal prejudice could destroy careers and companies. Jake Morrison had lost his pilot's license permanently and faced federal charges for conspiracy to create a hostile work environment. His family's shipping company had terminated all contracts with aviation firms to avoid association with his actions. Kyle Patterson had been sentenced to 12 months in prison and banned from working in security positions for any company that held federal contracts. His role as chief enabler had been documented so thoroughly that he'd become a case study in how bystander complicity enabled discrimination. But the most significant changes weren't punitive. They were transformational. Tony Fletcher's promotion to chief pilot operations had led to partnerships with historically black colleges and universities to create aviation scholarship programs specifically designed to address the industry's diversity deficit. Within 6 months, pilot training programs that had been 90% white for decades were seeing enrollment rates that reflected actual population demographics. Maria Santos had transformed from maintenance supervisor to director of workplace culture, implementing programs that ensured every employee felt valued and heard regardless of their background or position. Her small acts of kindness had evolved into company-wide policies that prioritized human dignity over hierarchical power structures. David Kim's documentation of the discrimination had earned him recognition from federal civil rights organizations and led to his appointment as an advisor on workplace documentation standards. His mechanical expertise combined with his moral courage made him a powerful voice for change throughout the industry. Sophia Valdez had survived her complicity by demonstrating genuine remorse and committing to become an advocate for workplace equity. Her Harvard MBA and insider knowledge of corporate culture made her an effective force for ensuring that discrimination policies weren't just written, but actually implemented. Carmen Ruiz had parlayed her documentation of the Skyline incident into a career as a workplace justice advocate, using social media to expose discrimination across multiple industries. Her live stream of the original incident had been viewed over 50 million times, and inspired countless other employees to document and report workplace discrimination. The scholarship programs that emerged from Mitchell Aviation Holdings created opportunities for students who had never considered aviation careers because they'd never seen people who looked like them in cockpits or engineering positions. Within a year, aviation schools reported their most diverse enrollment in history. Congressional hearings had led to new federal legislation requiring aviation companies to undergo regular civil rights audits. The industry that had operated on informal networks and unspoken assumptions about who belonged where was being forced to confront its own bias through federal oversight and public accountability. But perhaps the most important transformation was cultural. The story of the janitor who turned out to be a billionaire CEO had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of assumptions and the cost of discrimination. It was being taught in business schools, discussed in corporate boardrooms, and referenced in diversity training programs across multiple industries. The phrase, "You never know who you're really talking to," had become shorthand for treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their apparent position or status. Aviation forums that had once been dominated by discussions of technical specifications and career advancement now included ongoing conversations about inclusion opportunity and the importance of looking past superficial indicators of worth to recognize talent wherever it existed. The changes weren't perfect, and they weren't universal. Discrimination couldn't be eliminated through policy changes alone. But the Skyline incident had created an awareness that made such behavior more difficult to ignore and more expensive to defend. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that accountability was possible, that documentation could lead to justice, and that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination was simply refusing to accept that it was inevitable or unchangeable. The 8-year-old boy who had drawn pictures of his father as a pilot had watched his hero become an even bigger hero by proving that dignity, competence, and dreams had no color restrictions. And across the aviation industry, children who had never imagined themselves in cockpits were beginning to believe that the sky really was the limit. 2 years after the incident that changed everything, Darius Mitchell stood at the podium of the International Aviation Conference, looking out at an audience of pilots, executives, engineers, and students from around the world. Behind him, a massive screen displayed a photo of him in his janitor's uniform, alongside an image of him in his pilot's uniform, the visual representation of a story that had become legendary in aviation circles. 2 years ago, he began his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. I walked into my own hangar wearing a gray uniform, carrying a mop, and prepared to be invisible. I thought I was conducting an investigation into workplace discrimination. What I discovered was something much more profound. The audience was silent, hanging on every word from the man who had transformed their industry through 18 months of documented courage. I discovered that discrimination isn't just about cruel words or unfair treatment. It's about the dreams we don't allow people to pursue, the potential we refuse to recognize, and the limitations we place on human possibility based on superficial assumptions about who belongs where. In the front row, Jaden Mitchell sat beside his father's assistant, now 10 years old and wearing a junior pilot's uniform that wasn't too big for him anymore. He listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that his father's story was also his story, and the story of every child who had ever been told that their dreams were too big for their circumstances. When I emerged from that aircraft in Dubai, when I walked down those stairs wearing a custom suit instead of a janitor's uniform, I wasn't revealing who I had become. I was revealing who I had always been. The same person who had been invisible for 18 months was the same person who owned the company, who held pilot certification, who had the education and experience and qualifications that everyone assumed I couldn't possibly possess. Maria Santos sat in the 5th row wearing the professional attire of her new position as Director of Workplace Culture for Mitchell Aviation Holdings. Beside her sat Tony Fletcher, whose pilot training programs had graduated their most diverse class in aviation history just 3 months earlier. The lesson isn't that every janitor is secretly a CEO. Darius continued. The lesson is that human worth isn't determined by job titles, skin color, or the assumptions other people make about our potential. The lesson is that when we look past superficial indicators and judge people by their character, their competence, and their contributions, we discover capabilities we never knew existed. Carmen Ruiz live-streamed the speech to an audience of 200,000 viewers, many of whom had followed her workplace justice advocacy since the original Skyline incident. Comments poured in from around the world, people sharing their own stories of overcoming discrimination and finding the courage to reveal their true capabilities. My son asked me recently why I spent 18 months being invisible when I could have simply revealed who I was from the beginning. Darius said, his voice warming as he spoke about the boy who had never stopped believing his father was a hero. I told him that sometimes the most powerful way to show people who you are is to first show them who you're not. Sometimes the most effective way to prove that limitations are artificial is to exceed every expectation people place on you. The audience rose to their feet as Darius reached the conclusion of his speech, but he held up a hand to indicate he wasn't finished. I want to leave you with something my late wife told me years ago, something that guided me through 18 months of being treated as less than human while documenting evidence that would change how this industry thinks about human potential. The auditorium fell silent again, as people sensed they were about to hear the words that had motivated one of the most extraordinary workplace justice stories in modern history. She said, "Make sure every child can dream of flying regardless of color, background, or circumstances. Make sure that when they look up at the sky, they see possibility, not limitation." Darius gestured toward the audience, toward the diverse faces that represented the changes his investigation had helped create. Look around this room. 2 years ago, this audience would have looked very different. Today, you represent the future of aviation. Pilots, engineers, executives, and students from every background, every ethnicity, every walk of life. You represent the dreams that were always possible but not always encouraged. He paused, looking directly at his son in the front row. To the children watching this speech, to the young people who have been told their dreams are too big or too impractical or not suitable for people like them, I want you to remember something very important. The sky has no color barriers. Your potential is limited only by your willingness to pursue it, not by other people's assumptions about what you can achieve. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes, but more importantly, it marked the moment when an industry acknowledged that transformation wasn't just possible, but essential. As Darius stepped down from the podium and embraced his son as the audience filed out to return to companies and schools and training programs that were actively working to ensure equal opportunity for everyone, the real legacy of the Skyline incident became clear. It wasn't just about exposing discrimination or achieving justice for one man's mistreatment. It was about proving that when people are judged by their character and capabilities rather than their appearance or assumed status, extraordinary things become possible. That evening, as Darius tucked Jaden into bed, the boy asked the question that had defined their journey together. "Daddy, do you think I can really be a pilot someday?" Darius smiled, thinking about the scholarship programs, the changed policies, the federal legislation, and the cultural shift that had emerged from 18 months of documented courage. "Son," he said, "you can be anything you want to be. The sky belongs to everyone now." And for the first time in aviation history, that was actually true. If this story moved you, remember that dignity isn't earned through position, it's owed through humanity. Share this message, stand up for what's right, and never underestimate the power of treating everyone with respect, because you never know who you're really talking to. If you believe in justice, if you believe that everyone deserves dignity, regardless of their job title or background, then hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel because we're bringing you more stories about courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their dreams matter, that their potential is unlimited, and that discrimination has no place in our world. Comment below and tell us about a time when someone underestimated you, or when you witnessed workplace injustice. Your stories matter, your voice matters, and together we can create change one story at a time. Until next time, treat everyone with respect because you truly never know who you might be talking to.